The Continental Army, December 1776. In December 1776, General Cornwallis did not want to chase Washington further. Under Howe's orders, he established a chain of New Jersey outposts from New Brunswick to Burlington, including one in Bordertown and one in Trenton. Washington encamped his Continental Army near McConkey's Ferry, not far from Trenton. 1,700 men were unfit for duty and needed hospital care. In the retreat across New Jersey, Washington lost precious supplies and also lost contact with two important divisions. He lost men in prior battles. It was time for a surprise attack. Morale was down and reenlistment was due to expire at the end of 1776. The publication of the American Crisis, a pamphlet authored by Thomas Paine, gave the Army the morale boost it needed. Paine started out famously by saying, "These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of his country, but he that stands it now deserves the love and the thanks of men and women." Prior to the attack, Washington had a spy named John Honeywell. He gained the trust of the British, believing him to be a loyalist. He was captured by the Americans thinking he was a Tory and brought to Washington. There he told all he had found out. To keep up appearances, the next day he was to be hung as a Tory. A small fire broke out and he was able to escape just as planned. Troops from General Sullivan and Charles Lee now had the total about 6,000. Unfortunately, it was reduced down to 2,400 due to guarding supplies, sick men, and some ferries. Washington was going to first attack the Haitians at Mount Holly, but intelligence convinced him to proceed to Trenton. His plan included 3 crossings of the river. The largest contingent was to lead the attack on Trenton. The second column was to cross at Dunk's Ferry, which was being guarded. This was to create a diversion to the south. The third column was to cross at Trenton Ferry and hold the bridge across the Assunpink Creek just south of Trenton in order to prevent any enemy escapes. As far as boat goes, they were operated by experienced watermen, including John Glover's Marblehead Regiment. They were experienced seamen that came from Marblehead, Massachusetts. In addition to large ferry vessels, which were big enough to carry large coaches and likely served as carrying horses and the artillery such as cannons during the crossing, a large number of Durham boats were used to transport the soldiers, including infantry and cavalry, across the river. These boats were designed to carry heavy loads from the Durham Iron Works. On the morning of December 25th, Christmas, George Washington ordered his Continental troops to be prepared for 3 days of food and to get fresh flints for their muskets. At 4 p.m. on December 25th, Washington's army arrived to begin the crossing of the river. The troops were issued their ammunition. Here's something really odd though. Even the officers and the musicians were ordered to carry muskets, which usually didn't happen. They were told that they were on a secret mission and they had to be as quiet as possible. They left the camp for McConkey's Ferry. Washington planned to require the crossings to begin as soon as it was dark enough to conceal their movements on the river. But most of the troops did not reach the crossing until about 6 o'clock. As the evening progressed, the weather became progressively worse, turning from drizzle to rain, then to sleet and snow. Washington had given the charge of the crossing to his chief of artillery, Henry Knox. Horses, 18 cannons, and men all had to be transported. It was very difficult due to the floating ice in the river. General George Washington was among the first of the troops to cross. Going where Virginia troops formed the sentry line, no one was to pass. They were all given a password: victory or death. Ammunition, horses, and men were all crossed by 3 a.m. and ready by 4 o'clock to march. Although a few fell overboard, there were no deaths from the crossing and all artillery made it across safely. There were a total of 3 crossings that were supposed to happen, but the other 2 crossings had trouble. Colonel Cadwalader at Dunk's Ferry got men across but no artillery. He had to send the men back. General Ewing never tried because the river was so treacherous. On the evening before the battle, Hessian commander Colonel Rahl was celebrating Christmas with his troops at the farm of Abraham Hunt, a wealthy merchant and a farmer from Trenton. Hunt played the role of a friendly loyalist host and gave Rahl a false sense of security while George Washington and his troops were preparing for a surprise attack. Colonel Rahl was not well liked by his men or his fellow commanders. Major Grant of the British Army, many loyalists, and some deserters had warned of an attack. There had been some small skirmishes prior to the attack. When Rahl was again urged to fortify the town, he replied, "Let them come. We will go at them with the bayonet." As the army started out the journey, it was rough. Some civilians did come to volunteer. But once they came to Bear Tavern Road, things got a little bit better and they began to move faster. The ground was slippery, but it was level and it made it easier for the horses and artillery. Many men had no shoes and wrapped their feet in rags, leaving bloody footprints in the snow. The march to get to Trenton was a grueling 9-mile trek. General Sullivan sent a courier to Washington to tell them that the weather was wetting his men's gunpowder. Washington replied, "Tell Sullivan to use the bayonet. I am resolved to take Trenton." Now here's something really strange. The army was startled by a group of 50 armed men who were led by an American, Adam Steffen. He had no idea about the plan to attack Trenton. He had attacked a Haitian outpost himself. Washington feared that they had ruined their attack, but proceeded anyway, hoping Raleigh thought that was the main attack. The Haitians had established an outpost at the Cooper's shop on Pennington Road, which is about 1 mile northwest of Trenton. At 8 a.m. in the morning on December 26, Washington led the assault on it, riding in front of his soldiers. A Haitian commander came out and yelled, "The enemy!" Washington ordered the escape route to Princeton to be immediately cut off. The Haitians then had an organized retreat back to Trenton. General Sullivan entered Trenton by an abandoned river road and blocked the only crossing over the Assunpong Creek to cut off the Haitian escape. General Nathanael Greene led a division that had to drive the Haitians from their outpost in the north. Washington and Knox had the artillery formed at the head of King and Queen Streets. After the exchange of one volley, they turned and ran, some trying to swim across the creek while others escaping over the bridge, which had not been cut off yet. Believe it or not, 20 British dragoons also fled. As Greene and Sullivan's column pushed into the town, Washington moved to the high ground north of King and Queen Street to see the action and direct his troops. By this time, the U.S. artillery from the other side of the Delaware River had come into action and was devastating the Hessian positions. Colonel Raleigh was woken to find that the American rebels had taken the main streets of the town. This is where his engineers had told him to build a redoubt. The American cannons stationed at the head of the two main streets came into action. Raleigh directed his regiment to clear the guns. The Haitians formed ranks and began to advance up the street, but their formations were quickly broken by the guns and fire. Breaking ranks, the Haitians fled. Raleigh ordered 2 3-pound cannons to go into action. They only got off 6 rounds each within just a few minutes. Half of the Haitians manning their guns were killed by the American cannons. After the men fled to cover behind houses and fences, their cannons were taken by the Americans. Following the capture of the cannons, the Americans advanced down King Street. The Neapolitan regiments were separated from the Losberg and Raleigh regiments. Those 2 regiments fell back into a field outside of town. They took heavy losses from grape shot and musket fire. In the southern part of town, Americans under the command of Sullivan began to overwhelm the Haitians. John Stark led a bayonet charge at the Neapolitan regiment. The resistance broke because their weapons would not fire. He led a column of men to block off the escape of the troops across the creek. The Haitians in the field attempted to reorganize and make one last attempt to retake the town. Raleigh decided to attack the American flank on the heights north of town. The Haitians began to move with the Brigadier's band playing fifes, bugles, and drums to help the Haitian spirit. Washington moved his troops to assume battle formation against the enemy. The 2 Haitian regiments began moving towards King Street, even though they were taking fire from 3 different directions. Some Americans had taken up defense positions inside of houses to reduce their exposure. Some civilians actually joined in the fight against the Haitians. Despite this, they continued to push, almost recapturing their cannons. At the head of King Street, General Knox ordered his troops to take the cannons back. 6 men ran, seized the cannons, and turned them on the Haitians. With most of the Haitians unable to fire their guns, they broke formation and began to scatter. Raleigh was mortally wounded. Washington led his troops down from the high ground. Most of the Haitians retreated to an orchard. The Americans were in close pursuit. The Haitians were quickly surrounded, and they agreed to terms of surrender. All in all, the Haitian forces lost 22 killed in action, including Colonel Raleigh. After Colonel Raleigh's death, a note was found in his pocket warning him that the American troops were coming. 83 were wounded and about 900 were captured. About 400 actually escaped. The Americans suffered only 2 deaths during the march and 5 wounded from the battle, including a near-fatal shoulder wound to future President James Monroe. Other losses may have incurred by these brave patriots later on, including exhaustion, exposure, and illnesses. This may have raised their fatalities more than the Haitians. Contrary to popular belief, the Haitians were not drunk when the Americans came and attacked them. Very famous artwork capturing this whole event, Washington crossing the Delaware, was painted in 1851 by German-American artist Emanuel Leutze. Other than George Washington, other famous people were in this painting as well. Future President James Monroe, Prince Whipple, an African-American patriot who fought in the American Revolution. He was enslaved but was given emancipation after the war. General Nathanael Greene, leaning over the side of the boat. General Edward Hand, seated and holding his hat. It's just an awesome symbol of American courage and resolve. The Americans needing a victory were certainly daring, brave, and unforgettable on that Christmas. Thanks for watching. We'll keep the videos coming here on Strange History. Hey, check out our video on history's most notorious traitor, Benedict Arnold.